Chapter 82. I raised my head to look at Chairman Su, but other than a gloomy expression, I couldn't see anything else. At that moment, my heart raced as I thought of many possibilities, but in the end, I felt that Chairman Su didn't see through it. At most, he was suspicious of me because the time I came to the branch coincided with the time of Mount Taishi's accident. Under such circumstances, if I were to lose my composure, I would give myself away. After staying silent for a while, I said to Chairman Su, "This is related to a strange experience that I had previously. I originally planned to tell Chairman Su about it, but I didn't expect you to ask first. But because this is an important matter, I want to tell you alone." "Oh." Chairman Su raised his eyelids and didn't say anything. Xie Tianyu, who was at the side, probably thought that I was going to use some method to snatch his spot. So he anxiously said, "What do you have to say behind our backs?" I didn't pay attention to him and just looked at Chairman Su. After staying silent for a while, Chairman Su waved his hand and asked the others to wait at the door. Although Xie Tianyu was unwilling, since Chairman Su had spoken, he could only helplessly follow Yang Kaichen out. However, before he left, he glared at me with a sinister expression, as if he wanted to threaten me. I smiled at him and didn't care about him at all. Although this fellow was already in the Earth Master realm, he probably grew up under the protection of others and was spoiled rotten. He didn't have any EQ, so there was nothing to worry about. After they all left, Chairman Su faintly opened his mouth and said to me, "Can you speak now?" I nodded and thought about my words before saying to him, "The reason why my Dao Qi increased so much is because I once found a true dragon's vein." "What?" President Su immediately sat up from his chair, and his previously calm expression changed drastically. It seemed that he was shocked by this news and didn't say anything for a long time. After staying silent for a while, he suddenly reacted and asked me hastily, "Is this true?" The value of a true dragon vein wasn't something that Mount Taisher could compare to. The entire Metaphysics Association only had one true dragon vein, so it was no wonder that Chairman Su lost his composure. I nodded and said, "Of course." On the way to the Fire God Temple, the signs of the true dragon vein were very obvious. It was definitely reasonable to say that they had found the true dragon vein there. Even though I admitted to it, President Su didn't get more excited. Instead, his expression became doubtful. "Since you found the true dragon vein, why didn't your cultivation break through to the dragon-seeking realm?" I smiled wryly and shook my head. This is the strange experience I was talking about. At that time, I coincidentally found the true dragon vein. I excitedly went over to absorb the dragon energy into my body. I thought that I would definitely be able to break through, but who knew that the true dragon vein would only stay there for a day? When I went over the next day, the true dragon vein had actually disappeared. "What?" President Su was startled by my words. He squinted his eyes and pondered for a moment. His face darkened as he said, "The true dragon's vein only lasted for a day and then suddenly disappeared. Don't lie to me." I hastily replied, "Of course I won't speak nonsense." At that time, I was also extremely astonished. I stayed there for many days and looked everywhere, but I couldn't find the true dragon's vein. What's even weirder was that the ancestral dragon's vein and the embryonic dragon's vein that extended from the true dragon's vein were still there. Only the core true dragon's vein had disappeared. According to my conjecture, something must have happened. With my cultivation, I wasn't able to see through it. Thus, after joining the Metaphysics Association, I originally wanted to spread the news and let the seniors with profound cultivation take a look. Perhaps they might be able to find the true dragon's vein again. In reality, the true dragon's vein was in the Fire God Temple. If the Fire God Temple wasn't found, it would be impossible to find the true dragon's vein. I reckoned that I said that to give President Sue a false impression. I wanted him to think that the true dragon's vein was hidden due to some unforeseen event. As long as someone with slightly higher cultivation went over, they might be able to find it. After hearing what I said, President Sue's expression finally became better. He nodded and said, "Since the ancestral dragon's vein and the embryonic dragon's vein are still there, it proves that the true dragon's vein really existed. It's great that you have such intentions. As long as you can prove what you said, I can recommend you to be the vice president of our Shenzhen Metaphysics Association. Moreover, after reporting it, you will definitely get a spot to observe the true dragon's vein." After hearing what he said, I was instantly elated. The reason why I told him this news was because I wanted to distance myself from the changes in the Mount Tai stone. On the other hand, I wanted to make an exchange of benefits. I wanted to use this news to exchange for President Sue's protection. President Sue was worthy of being the leader of the association. He understood my intentions so quickly and gave me a promise. Although he didn't directly promise to help me, his recommendation for me to be promoted to the vice president obviously had this intention. Originally, I wanted to decline the spot to observe the true dragon's vein. However, after thinking about it, I was going to break through to the dragon-seeking realm sooner or later. If I didn't observe the true dragon's vein, it would be hard to explain myself. Thus, I didn't decline and just smiled in agreement. Afterwards, I wrote down the exact location of the fire god temple. However, it was a primitive forest with few people. There were many places that didn't have names, so I had to draw out a map. When I first went there, although Director Liu didn't give me the map, feng shui masters were very sensitive to geography. After walking back and forth a few times, I could roughly draw out the route. As I sat there earnestly drawing the map, I inadvertently raised my head and saw that President Sue was looking at me without blinking. His face was filled with excitement, greed, and even a trace of viciousness. I was suddenly startled. The true dragon's vein was very important. Moreover, its value was too high. Wasn't it a bit inappropriate to tell President Sue so rashly? If he didn't want to report it to the Metaphysics Association and wanted to keep it for himself, would he kill me later to keep it a secret? Although I was young and didn't have much experience, the people in the metaphysics world that I had interacted with, such as Deng Meng and Zhao Yongkun, were all vicious and merciless people. For their own benefits, they would definitely do anything. Seeing President Sue's expression, I couldn't help but be on guard. Just as I was stunned, President Sue noticed my abnormality. He anxiously asked me, "Why did you stop drawing?" "The terrain there is very complicated. I don't remember some of the routes clearly." I casually answered him, lowered my head, and continued to draw the route. Although I was suspicious, I had already told him about it. There was no room for regret, so I could only brace myself and continue to draw. However, I was still careful and didn't draw the route that clearly. This way, when the time came to find it, I would most likely have to lead the way. After I finished drawing the map, I gave it to President Sue. He was also a feng shui master, and his cultivation was much higher than mine. He hastily picked it up and looked at it. After a while, he frowned and asked me, "Why is the route so simple? There are a few places that aren't connected." I smiled and explained, "It's a primitive forest. There are no roads, only small paths like the Beast Trail and Canyon. Moreover, they aren't fixed. If it rains, they might change their route. That's why it's impossible to draw this part of the route. Also, there are some extremely strange places along the way. I experienced great danger and narrowly escaped death to reach that place. The situation is rather complicated. When it's time to set out, I will tell you the details." I didn't say these words carelessly. On the way to the fire god temple, There were places like the Yellow Springs River and the Departed Soul Valley. Even with President Sue's strength, it would be difficult for him to pass through them alone. I purposely didn't say these places out loud to give myself a way out. I didn't know if President Sue had seen through my thoughts or not. After staring at me for a while, he put away the map and told me, "Today, I'll be promoted to a director. After this matter is confirmed, I'll be promoted to vice president." I let out a sigh of relief. It didn't matter if he wanted to give me some benefits or not. At least for this period of time, my safety was guaranteed. When I left the Metaphysics Society, I met Xie Tianyu again. He seemed to know that I had been promoted to a director. When he saw my expression, he was furious. However, I was thinking about President Sue's matter, so I didn't bother with him and left. Even though I had made preparations in reality after I told him the location of the Fire God Temple, the rest of the route wasn't important. It was just a matter of time. As long as he had the heart, he would definitely be able to find it. If President Sue really wanted to keep this information to himself, the possibility of him killing me was quite high. After I returned, I was especially careful. I didn't even sleep at night. Instead, I sat cross-legged on the bed and stabilized the Tao energy in my body while being on guard. The sound of footsteps, the breathing, and the fluctuation of Tao Qi were definitely not my illusion. But why did the person outside the door suddenly disappear? If this person was President Sue, did he suddenly change his mind after standing outside the door for a long time? If it wasn't President Sue, then who could it be? He thought about it for a long time, but the result was still a mess. He couldn't understand it at all. That night, I didn't sleep and just sat there until the sun rose. Everything was normal after that. The person didn't appear again. After the sun rose, I received a call from President Sue. He told me that he had reported to the Metaphysics Society's headquarters that I had found the true dragon's vein. The headquarters would send someone to investigate. He asked me not to divulge this information during this time. President Sue's words were normal, and I didn't see anything strange. Moreover, since he had reported to the headquarters, I didn't need to worry about him having the intention to kill me to keep my mouth shut anymore. After telling me this, President Sue told me that in 1 week, the Guangdong Province Metaphysics Conference would be held. At this conference, the feng shui master of the Seeking Dragon realm would be tested. Those who passed the test would be qualified to go to the Metaphysics Society's headquarters to observe the true dragon's vein. Now that I was a member of the board, I had the right to participate in the conference. After explaining the situation, he told me that I hadn't confirmed the fact that I had found the true dragon's vein yet. The reward for observing the true dragon's vein couldn't be fulfilled yet. Moreover, the true dragon's vein only appeared once every 3 years. If I missed this opportunity, even if the reward was confirmed, I would have to wait for another 3 years. I didn't really care about this problem. It didn't matter whether it was now or 3 years later. However, if I relied on the true dragon's veins chi from the jade bracelet, I would be able to break through in a few months. If I didn't go this time, it wouldn't be easy to hide it. I pondered and didn't make up my mind. President Sue seemed to be impatient. He didn't wait for my answer and directly told me, if I decide to go, I should go to the Metaphysics Society today to register. If I don't go today, it will be considered that I have given up this opportunity. After hanging up, I thought for a while and decided to register. No matter if I could get the quota or not, it wouldn't be bad to go to the conference. Ever since I had started my career, I had always acted alone. Geomancy experts needed to learn from other experts. It wouldn't be bad to interact with other geomancy experts. After making up my mind, I tidied up a little before leaving. At the Earth Master realm, not sleeping for 1 night didn't affect me much. The abundant Tao energy in my body was enough to make up for my lack of mental power. When I was about to eat breakfast, I received a call from Yang Kaichen. He told me the same thing and asked me if I wanted to register. When he knew I was going, he insisted on coming to pick me up. I couldn't reject him, so I agreed. After hanging up, I went to a nearby breakfast shop to eat while waiting for Yang Kaichen. However, Yang Kaichen didn't show up even after I had finished my breakfast. Feeling helpless, I called him back to ask about the situation. However, the call went through for a long time, and Yang Kaichen didn't pick up his call. I called him a few times, but it was still the same. Seeing that it was getting late, I was worried that I would miss the registration time. So I rushed to the Metaphysics Society. When I arrived at the Metaphysics Society, I met Xie Tianyu and a group of people walking out from the side before I could enter the building. He quickly walked in front of me and looked at me angrily. I knew you had ulterior motives. You actually dared to register today. Let me tell you, Yang Kaichen's lackey is in the hospital. If you dare to walk through this door, I will also send you to the hospital. I was stunned. Then anger surged out from my heart. No wonder Yang Kaichen lost contact after making the call. It was his doing. I coldly looked at him. As a geomancy expert, don't you think it's too much to make a move on an ordinary geomancy expert? Xie Tianyu chuckled and said disdainfully, "This is a society where the weak are prey to the strong." He knows that he's an ordinary geomancy expert, but he still dares to meddle in our business. He deserves to be taught a lesson. I also smiled at him. But I'm not an ordinary geomancy expert. If you don't let me walk through the door, where do you get your confidence from? Hearing my words, Xie Tianyu laughed out loud. He pointed at the people behind him and arrogantly said to me, "I brought a dozen people, and 4 of them are council members. They are in the same realm as us. Can't you see that? You actually dare to ask me where I get my confidence from? I want to ask you, you're still so calm. Where do you get your confidence from? I'll give you 10 seconds. If you don't scram, I'll get someone to help you." I shook my head. Not only was this person not shrewd, but he also had a low EQ and IQ. An ordinary geomancy expert in the dragon-seeking realm could only draw qi like a finger. The people that Xie Tianyu brought were all old geomancy experts. Although their Dao qi might have increased after a long time, it was still too far away from my current realm of drawing qi like a finger. Even if they worked together, it wouldn't be a threat. Without waiting for me to speak, Xie Tianyu's sinister expression completely exploded. He pointed at me and ordered the others to attack me. Then, the middle-aged men behind him each took out a yellow talisman and walked towards me. Seeing this scene, Xie Tianyu revealed a complacent smile. Chapter 84. The 4 directors of the Metaphysics Society that Xie Tianyu had brought with him walked over to me. At the same time, the yellow talismans in their hands gathered Tao energy and threw them at me. They were all fierce Yang talismans. The fierce Yang talisman, as the name suggested, was a talisman that gathered Yang energy. Once the Yang energy gathered to a certain degree, it would become very violent. It could create a raging fire out of thin air. If too much Tao energy was poured into it, it could even explode. It was like a small grenade. When used against ghosts and spirits, it was extremely powerful. If used against humans, the damage could not be underestimated. It was the most common talisman used by feng shui masters in battles. However, I didn't wait for the 4 talismans to reach me. I took out 4 talismans and threw them at them. They accurately collided with the talismans that they had thrown at me. The gathering Yin talisman could gather dense Yin energy. It was usually used to arrange special formations or to deal with strange Yang ghosts. Seeing my actions, Xie Tianyu didn't even have time to laugh. He gaped and pointed at me in shock. He stammered, how could you use 4 talismans at once? Normally, a feng shui master at the dragon-seeking realm would use up all the energy in their body to make 2 talismans. Using talismans 3 to 5 times wouldn't be a problem. However, that was 1 talisman at a time, unlike me, who could use so many at once. If I wanted to use 4 talismans at the same time, I had to surpass the dragon-seeking realm. The reason why I could use them now was that I wasn't far from the pressure point realm. On the other hand, when I absorbed the dragon energy from the jade bracelet, I had gathered a large amount of Tao energy, although it hadn't completely stabilized and turned into my cultivation. I could still use it. In simpler terms, the stabilized Tao energy had become my cultivation and could be used repeatedly. The unstable Tao energy was a one-time consumable. It wasn't a problem to use it, but it would be gone after it was used. Previously, President Su's strength was higher than mine, so he could see through my cultivation. However, Xie Tianyu's strength wasn't as strong as mine, so he thought that I was just a normal feng shui master at the dragon-seeking realm. After the 8 talismans collided in the air, yin and yang collided. In an instant, the 4 fierce yang talismans lost their light and fell to the ground, turning into ordinary yellow paper. Although the radiance of the 4 yin gathering talismans had faded a lot, their power hadn't disappeared. They still flew toward the 4 people. Almost in an instant, the 4 of them were entangled by the yin qi. Their faces revealed a greenish-black color as they clutched their lungs and coughed. Although Xie Tianyu was not affected by the yin gathering talisman, his face was ashen. He was shocked and angry. After a while, the 4 directors of the Metaphysics Association used their own methods to alleviate the pain. They stood there and looked at me. Their faces were filled with fear. It seemed that they didn't dare to attack me anymore. At this time, Xie Tianyu's eyes suddenly lit up, and he shouted at the 4 directors. He used 4 talismans at the same time, so the Taoist qi in his body must be exhausted. Even if it is not empty, I don't think he has so many talismans in his hands. Quickly use talismans to deal with him. I will compensate you twice the amount of talismans you used later. As soon as he said that, he took out a yellow talisman and threw it at me. After listening to him, the 4 council members' frightened faces vanished. They exchanged looks and took out their yellow talismans, throwing them at me. I glanced at Xie Tianyu. Talismans weren't cheap, even for a feng shui master. He promised to compensate us twice the amount of talismans we used. He was really rich. Although the 4 directors had different degrees of injuries, they had thrown 5 talismans at me at the same time. Their power was more than twice as strong as before, although the Tao energy in my body was still abundant, and I had made quite a few talismans while I was waiting for Zhao Ying and Wang Yongjun's factory dormitory, so I had plenty of talismans at the moment. However, using 5 talismans at the same time was not enough for me. After thinking for a while, I took out 4 more yin gathering talismans. However, I didn't throw them out like before. I held them in my hand and waited for the 5 talismans to reach me. Then I used my Taoist qi to activate the 4 yin gathering talismans. At the same time, I discreetly contacted Tong Tong. I didn't ask her to show herself, but to send some yin energy from her jade bracelet. After I had activated the yin gathering talismans, the others wouldn't be able to see it. The 5 talismans flew toward me at the same time. The light on the talismans changed, and a tremendous amount of explosive yang energy shrouded me in just a blink of an eye. Unfortunately, the exploding yang energy was just a paper tiger. In the next second, the yin energy I had released collided with it, and it vanished. This time, Xia Tianyu's face changed. He pointed at me. His lips trembled, but he couldn't utter a word. He didn't talk, but I had something to say. I took out another talisman. This time, it wasn't a Yin-gathering talisman, but a scorching yang talisman. I looked at Xia Tianyu and sneered. What? Did you break your hand just like that? Didn't you say that you wouldn't let me through the door? And you guys. I turned to look at the 4 directors of the Metaphysics Society and continued, as directors of the Metaphysics Society, you didn't help your colleagues. Instead, you gathered together to bully your colleagues. Your behavior is a disgrace to the Metaphysics Society. The 4 people's faces were unnatural. They turned to the side and didn't dare to look at me. I didn't bother with them anymore. I turned around and walked towards Xia Tianyu. While walking, I said to him, I know you want the quota for the Metaphysics Society. Whether you believe it or not, I didn't want to compete with you. Even though you've been rude to me, I didn't take it to heart. However, you've crossed the line. You didn't even let go of an ordinary geomancy master like Yang Kaichen. Today, you even tried to force yourself on me. As I approached him, Xia Tianyu's face was full of fear. He sat on the ground, looking very distressed. I looked at him and couldn't help but shake my head. He had only used the talisman once, so he definitely had some strength left. Unfortunately, he didn't have any courage left. He was completely frightened by me and didn't have any thoughts of resisting. After walking in front of him, I looked down at him and said, when a dog is chewing on a bone, if a person walks too close to it, the dog will definitely bark at the person. You know the reason? Xia Tianyu shook his head blankly. I bent down and looked at him with even more disdain. Because the dog thinks that when a person comes close to it, it's going to snatch its bone. Of course, a person won't snatch a dog's bone. However, if the dog barks twice, then that's fine. If it dares to bite someone, then it's destined that it won't be able to eat the bone. Then I threw the talisman in my hand at him and stood up. I didn't look at him anymore and walked into the Metaphysics Society. As I walked, I said, since you've opened your mouth to bite someone, then the quota for the Metaphysics Society is mine. When I entered the Metaphysics Society, Xia Tianyu let out a blood-curdling scream. Then his body started to burn. The other directors quickly ran over and used talismans to help him dissolve the explosive yang energy around him. I smiled and threw this matter to the back of my mind. I went to the top floor and went to Chairman Su's office. After entering, Chairman Su was standing by the window. He turned around and glanced at me faintly. Why did you decide to sign up again? I smiled and said, participating in the exchange will allow me to broaden my horizons. Chairman Su didn't say anything else and handed me a form. After I filled it up, he told me that the exchange would be held in a week at the Metaphysics Society's branch in Shenzhen. Originally, I thought that I would have to go to Guangzhou. I didn't think that it would be held in Shenzhen. Before I left, Chairman Su looked at me with a profound gaze and said, I won't pursue the matter between you and Xia Tianyu. However, Xia Tianyu's power is much weaker than yours. In this exchange, I hope that you can represent our Shenzhen branch and take back the honor of being the champion. The champion of the previous exchange was in our branch. That's why we're holding it here. Standing next to him were 3 middle-aged men who were about the same age as President Su. According to President Su's introduction, among the 3 of them, there was a tall and skinny man named Yang Shilong. He was the vice president of the Metaphysics Society. After listening to President Su's words, I was shocked. I didn't expect that the Metaphysics Union would send a vice president. President Su was already in existence at the peak of the Earth Master realm. What kind of cultivation would the vice president of the Metaphysics Union have? Could it be the legendary celestial master? I couldn't help but lift my head to look at him. Unfortunately, the gap between our cultivation bases was too big. I couldn't tell his realm. I could only feel that he was stronger than President Su. Besides Vice President Yang, there were two other fat and skinny middle-aged men called Lu Zheng and Feng Xing. They were the directors of the Metaphysics Society's headquarters. I looked at them. Their strength shouldn't be weaker than President Su's. After the introductions, the vice president called Yang Shilong asked me with a serious face, "Let me confirm with you again. Is the true dragon vein fake?" I was about to reply when the fat middle-aged man called Feng Xing interrupted. "You little doll, think carefully before you reply. If we came here for nothing, the consequences will be severe." I smiled and replied without hesitation, "You don't need to think about it. What I said is absolutely true. There's no falsehood in it." "Good." Yang Shilong couldn't help but clap and said loudly, "If we can really find the true dragon vein, the Metaphysics Society won't treat you badly. The president already told me that if we succeed, you can follow me back to the headquarters. If you don't have a master, the president can take you in as his last disciple. If you have a master and don't want one, the president can guarantee that he can help you advance to the glory of knowledge realm." Hearing his conditions, I was excited. I didn't care about being his disciple, but the guarantee that I could advance to the glory of knowledge realm was too tempting. The further I walked on the path of a feng shui master, the more dangerous the road ahead would be. Every step was incomparably difficult, not to mention the guarantee that I could advance to a few realms. Unfortunately, I knew that they definitely wouldn't be able to find the true dragon vein. Even if they had a way to get the fire god temple out, the mysterious stone man wouldn't let them get what they wanted. Thus, all these promises were just flowers in the mirror and the moon in the water. They were destined to be unfulfilled. After being excited for a while, I became indifferent. Originally, according to the Metaphysics Society's intention, I was to immediately bring them to the fire god temple. On the way, I was curious as to how the receptionist recognized me. After asking, I learned that they had already recorded the photos of all the feng shui masters participating in the competition. As soon as they saw the participants, they directly brought them to the main hall. When we arrived at the special area for feng shui masters, I saw a seat with my name on it. At this moment, many people were already seated. I went to my seat and sat down. Not long after, I saw Xie Tianyu also appear. This guy used to have long hair, but now he had a crew cut. I guessed that it was burned by the fierce young talisman I used that day. I didn't find it strange. The rules of the competition were that all the qualified feng shui masters in each city could participate. In the end, there would only be 10 spots. Since the Shenzhen Metaphysics Association won the last competition, they had a guaranteed spot this time. In other words, no matter what the Shenzhen Metaphysics Association's final ranking was, even if they weren't in the top 10, as long as they ranked first in the branch, they would get a spot. Originally, if Xie Tianyu was the only one participating, he would definitely get a spot. But now that I was here, as long as his ranking was lower than mine, this spot would be mine. I don't know if President Su knew about the conflict between me and Xie Tianyu. We were clearly from the same branch, but our seats weren't together. However, this was also good. It prevented him from playing any more tricks on me. Just as I was looking around, a voice suddenly came from beside me. "Little brother, do you still remember me?" I turned around and saw an unfamiliar young man sitting next to me. He was handsome and wore elegant clothes. He was smiling at me, but his smile looked a little frivolous. I frowned and was about to ask him who he was when I suddenly remembered the time when I had just entered the university. I had seen this person before. He was the swindler I had met on the plane. Chapter 86. I remember that. You're that. Nangong? This fellow had given me his business card. Moreover, his name was very unique. I recalled his name after thinking for a while. Little brother, you still remember me? I told you that we were fated to meet again, and that we would definitely meet again. Today we met again. Nangong smiled brightly and moved closer to me discreetly. It seemed that he was very familiar with me. I discreetly glanced at the seat behind him. It had the word Nangong written on it. It seemed that I had misunderstood him. This fellow wasn't a swindler. He should be a powerful feng shui master. It was probably because of his frivolous words and actions that I had misunderstood him. However, the strange thing was that I couldn't feel any fluctuation of Tao energy when I looked at him. I couldn't see his realm at all. The participants were all feng shui masters at the dragon-seeking realm. It was possible that Nangong's cultivation was higher than mine. However, when I looked at the vice president of the Metaphysics Association, Yang Shilong, I could faintly feel the fluctuation of Tao energy. Could it be that this fellow's cultivation was higher than Yang Shilong's? As soon as this thought popped up in my head, I shook my head. Even if this fellow had started cultivating in his mother's womb, it was impossible for his cultivation to be higher than Yang Shilong's. There must be some special reason. Nangong looked as if he wanted to befriend me. I couldn't refuse him, so I started chatting with him. According to him, he was representing the Metaphysics Association in Guangzhou. He didn't have any intention of observing the true dragon's vein. He just wanted to have some fun. I snorted in disdain. Among those who came to participate in the competition, apart from me, who didn't want to see the quota for the true dragon vein, this fellow really knew how to act noble. After chatting for a while, someone came from the platform and announced that the exchange was about to start. I smiled at Nangong. Then I stopped talking and turned to look at the platform. Nangong laughed and moved closer to me. The last time I saw you, I noticed that your glabella was dark and the tip of your nose was red. I didn't expect that your face would be the same this time. Here, this is my business card. Remember to look for me if you need anything. Then he shoved a business card into my hand and smiled meaningfully. Then he turned around and didn't look at me anymore. I lowered my head and looked at the business card. It was the same as the one he had given me last time. There was no title or position, just a simple name and a number. I felt strange. The last time he had talked to me like that was fine. After all, I was still a fledgling university student. But now, I am a proper feng shui master. Usually, I read other people's fortune. Now, someone suddenly came to read my fortune. This feeling is very strange. However, after he introduced himself, I found out that he was just an ordinary member of the Metaphysics Association in Meizhou City. If he was just an ordinary member, he wouldn't be able to reach the Earth Master realm. Moreover, judging from his age, he wouldn't be able to break through in this lifetime. I felt strange. He was just an ordinary feng shui master. How could he attract such a big applause? Out of curiosity, I carefully listened to his speech. From his speech, I learned that although he was just an ordinary geomancy master, he had entered this profession when he was a teenager. He had been fixing tombs for people's residences, and he had been doing this for 70 years. After so many years, not only had he made a name for himself among the people, but his knowledge of feng shui was also very solid. His experience and knowledge were unparalleled. After listening to his speech, I slowly discovered a truth. Although feng shui masters had different realms, their foundation was still the knowledge of feng shui. Their realms depended on their talents and opportunities. Everyone had different fortunes. However, what could make a feng shui master reach a higher level was still the knowledge of feng shui. For example, the selection to observe the true dragon vein. Although it was related to everyone's realm, the test wasn't a competition of talismans. It was a competition of feng shui knowledge. This old man was called Zhao Dinggu. Due to various reasons, he couldn't break through to the Earth Master realm. However, his disciples were all at the Earth Master realm. One of them was even a director of the National Metaphysics Association. Because of this, no one dared to look down on this old man, even though he was just an ordinary feng shui master. After the old man finished his speech, the audience applauded for a long time. Everyone stood up to show their respect to this old man. Then, other feng shui masters came up to give their speeches. Most of them were experienced feng shui masters. During their speeches, they talked about the typical feng shui cases they had encountered. From these cases, they explained the problems that feng shui would encounter in the practical application. Since I had started to study feng shui, I didn't have much practical experience. Most of the time, I was just reading books. However, the speeches of these old men made up for my lack of experience. I learned a lot and benefited a lot. The entire morning was spent in continuous speeches. At noon, I wanted to go and find Yang Kaichen, but Nangong shamelessly pulled me back. He wanted me to take him to taste the local delicacies. I was just a foreigner. How could I know the local delicacies? However, no matter how hard I tried to explain, Nangong shamelessly followed me and didn't want to leave. One shouldn't slap a smiling face. I had no choice but to take this burden to lunch. Then we returned to the venue. In the afternoon, the dragon seizing competition, which was also the dragon seizing competition that people had been talking about, officially began. The feng shui masters who were watching the competition had taken their seats. Only the chairman of the Shenzhen branch of the Feng Shui Association, who was also Chairman Su, was left on the platform. He directed the attendants to bring us the information of the competition. Each of them had a small booklet. There were no words on the booklet. Instead, there were pictures of different landforms. Chapter 87. After briefly explaining the rules, Chairman Su added, "Only the 3 best geomancy maps will get points. The first geomancy map will get 3 points, the second will get 2 points, and the third will get 1 point. As for the other maps that aren't in the top 3, you won't get any points." Moreover, this was only the first round of the competition. After the end of the competition, according to the results of the competition, only the people with the most points will be able to enter the second round. The final ranking will be based on the combined results of the 2 rounds. After listening to the rules, I nodded. The rules were very reasonable. On one hand, it was a strict test of geomancy knowledge. On the other hand, it gave people many opportunities to reduce mistakes. It seemed that the Metaphysics Society had put in a lot of effort in setting up the rules. After Chairman Su finished speaking, all the participants picked up the maps in front of them and started to read them seriously. At the same time, the staff carried a large number of maps and distributed them to the geomancy masters. Although they weren't participating, they could gather their thoughts and give their answers to the questions. This way, they could improve together. After picking up the geomancy map, I flipped to the first one and frowned. It wasn't because the geomancy in the map was good, but because the geomancy was bad. The geomancy of a geomancy house was about the 4 aspects of dragon, cave, sand, and water. A good geomancy house usually had good geomancy in all 4 aspects. However, in the geomancy map in front of me, it was a barren land without sand, water, or a dragon vein. At first glance, I could tell that it was an ominous cave. Logically speaking, since it was a feng shui map that was issued after the examination, even if the feng shui wasn't very good, it should still be a place where people could be buried. However, The map in front of him was completely barren and couldn't be buried at all. Could it be that my geomancy wasn't right? Was there something else that I hadn't discovered? I lifted my head to look at the people around me. They all frowned and stared at the maps in their hands. I guess they had the same thought as me. After looking at the map for a long time, I confirmed that the first map didn't have good geomancy. After making up my mind, I started to look at the second map. At this time, I accidentally checked the time and found that I had spent 5 minutes on the first map, while Chairman Sue had only given me half an hour. Since time was tight, I didn't have time to look at the rest of the maps in detail. The next few maps had bad geomancy. However, they were better than the first one and could be used to bury people. After flipping through more than 10 maps, I understood that the questions were deliberately made to show us some mediocre geomancy. After all, there weren't many places with good geomancy, and the chances of encountering one were low. Most of the time, the feng shui master could only choose one of the mediocre feng shui. It seemed that this was also a misunderstanding given by the person who set the question, causing people to spend too much time in the mediocre feng shui at the beginning, so that there was not enough time for the later part. Fortunately, I believed in myself and quickly continued to read. Otherwise, if I really tried to compete with the geomancy of the first few places, I might lose this competition. When I reached the 15th picture, my eyes brightened. I made a mark on this picture and continued to flip through it. Very quickly, when I saw the 26th picture, I stopped and frowned for a long time. Only then did I cautiously make a mark on this picture as well, and then continue to flip through it. This time, after looking through all 30 maps, I didn't find any good geomancy. Were there only 2 places with good geomancy, and the third place had to be chosen from the other places with mediocre geomancy? Could it be that there were only 2 places with good geomancy? It was possible. Generally speaking, the geomancy of the geomancy was similar. Choosing one place with better geomancy was a test of the geomancy master's ability. However, I had a feeling that it wasn't the case. After all, the requirement was to choose the 3 places with the best geomancy. With such a requirement, the geomancy of the 3 places had to be better than the others. Otherwise, the answer wouldn't be convincing enough. With doubts in my mind, I turned around and looked at the pictures again. This time, when I reached the 7th picture and was about to continue, I caught a glimpse of something that I had completely overlooked. I stared at the geomancy map for a long time. Finally, I smiled and ticked off this map. After I finished, the half-an-hour time limit was up. The staff came down and collected everyone's booklets. President Sue was the host of the dragon seizing tournament. However, the judges were the other 2 presidents of the metaphysics branch. Their surnames were Wang and Xia. After putting away the booklet, Chairman Wang and Chairman Xia quickly divided the booklet into several stacks. Then the chubby Chairman Xia said to everyone with a smile, "I'm sure everyone has noticed that most of these 30 geomantic tombs are barren lands with barren hills and unruly rivers. They aren't places with good feng shui at all. I want to explain this point to everyone." He coughed and cleared his throat before continuing. In the geomancy of the geomancy map, the geomancy treasures can be found. It's nothing more than the 4 words Dragon Cave Sandwater. I'm sure everyone has already heard of some famous geomancy treasures. Perhaps you've even secretly noted them down. That's why we didn't choose those famous treasures. Instead, we chose places with dangerous geomancy. Of course, in these dangerous geomancy maps, there are 3 places with real geomancy treasures. They're hidden very deeply. Only by finding these 3 places will you be able to display the true level of a geomancy master and advance to the next stage of the tournament. After listening to him, I nodded. It was just as I had guessed. Everyone knew about the treasures of the geomancy. Only by finding the extraordinary treasures of the ordinary terrain could one be considered to have reached a higher level in geomancy. After President Xie finished speaking, President Wang stood up. He held a brand new booklet and said with a smile, "Next, I'll announce the 3 auspicious points. First, I'll announce the 3rd place." With that, he flipped the booklet to page 15 and faced the audience below the stage. Seeing the pattern on page 15, the geomancy masters under the stage exclaimed and whispered to each other. Many people looked annoyed. Obviously, they didn't see the geomancy of this place. Unlike the feng shui masters who were watching the competition, more than half of the participants looked very calm. Some of the less sophisticated ones already had smiles on their faces. After all, they were elites from all over the world. It seemed that this test was not difficult for them. After the answer was announced, President Wang continued to explain the geomancy of this place with a smile. From the pictures, this is just a simple piece of farmland. It's far from being beautiful. At first glance, it doesn't seem to be a good place to make a cave. However, please take a look at the small mound in the middle of the farmland. As soon as he finished speaking, one of the geomancy masters under the stage suddenly said loudly, "This mound looks like a koi carp. The farmland is perfectly round, and there's a circle of water around it. This is the shape of a golden basin for breeding carps. If the cave is formed at the mouth of the carp, it will ensure endless wealth for the future generations." President Wang nodded with a smile. "This old man is right. This is indeed a golden basin for breeding carps. It's very rare. Unfortunately, there are no dragons on the mound, and the farmland is man-made. It's easy to be destroyed, and the geomancy is unstable. Therefore, we've ranked this picture 3rd. After he finished speaking, all the geomancy masters nodded slightly. It was obvious that they agreed with his point of view. Then, President Wang waved the booklet in his hand and continued, "There are a total of 31 participants who chose this picture. I turned my head and saw that there were less than 40 people on the stage. This meant that most of them chose correctly. Other people's expressions were similar to mine. They didn't care about it at all. Only a few people showed annoyed expressions." At this time, President Xie picked up the booklet in his hand and flipped through it. He said, "Next, I'll announce the geomancy of the 2nd place." Chapter 88. After the discussion gradually subsided, President Xie picked up the booklet in his hand with a smile and faced the audience below the stage. As soon as they saw this map, the entire venue fell into an uproar. Most of the feng shui masters watching the competition were dumbfounded. Many people even exclaimed, "This is impossible. This is clearly an ominous cave. How can it be ranked 2nd?" Not only them, but many of the contestants also had a change of expression. Their faces were filled with disbelief. I heaved a sigh of relief. The map that President Xie showed was the 26th one I had chosen. President Xie was a smiling man. He knew how to keep people in suspense. After showing his answer, he didn't hurry to explain. Instead, he smiled and asked the audience, "Just now, I heard someone say that this is an ominous cave. I don't know why everyone said that. Can anyone explain it to me?" As soon as he finished speaking, an elderly feng shui master stood up from the spectator stands and said with certainty, "This is definitely a dangerous place. In Eunuch Yang's Shakes the Dragon scripture, there are 40 kinds of ominous caves. One of them says, when water passes through the bright hall, the water flows without obstruction. When chi doesn't gather, don't use it." This map is the 4th of the 40 ominous caves. The water pierces the heavens layout. It's definitely an ominous cave. His words resonated with many people. Many of them whispered to each other and looked at Chairman Xie suspiciously. President Xie didn't care and still had a smile on his face. He turned to the contestants and asked, 9 of you chose this feng shui map. It's obvious that you think it's a good place. I don't know how you judged it. Can anyone explain it to me? As he spoke, the other feng shui masters also looked at the contestants' seats. Their eyes shined brightly. This was a good time to show off. Soon, a young feng shui master, who looked about the same age as me, stood up. This young man was quite handsome, with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. His face also carried a bit of arrogance, as he said in a clear voice, what that senior said earlier was right. At first glance, this place is indeed the layout of water breaking the heavens. When I first saw it, I also thought so, but when I looked at it again later on, I found something strange. He paused. The old feng shui master was a bit impatient, and hurriedly said, "What's strange about the ominous caves layout? Tell me about it." Seeing his attitude, I slightly shook my head. In reality, many feng shui masters were like this. They were very stubborn and followed the most rigid rules. However, they didn't know that feng shui wasn't fixed. Many times, a small difference could lead to a great change in the original feng shui layout. The young feng shui master didn't get angry. The naturally formed underwater whirlpool that hid wind and gathered qi was a very accurate Great Fortune Cave. Once buried, one would be able to enter the Great Fortune realm. So this isn't a Heavenly Heart Water Breaks layout, but a Heavenly Heart Water Gathers layout, which is very rare. When he finished speaking, the whole place was silent. Everyone was thinking hard, and the expressions on their faces gradually changed from doubt to astonishment, and then from astonishment to excitement. Finally, under President Xia's lead, all the feng shui masters in the audience applauded. Even the old feng shui master who had doubted him put down his prejudices, his face full of admiration. I curiously looked at the young feng shui master, admiring him, although I could see the layout of this Heavenly Heart Water Gathers. Seeing it was one thing. Being able to explain it in such a simple way was another. At the very least, I didn't have the eloquence of this young feng shui master. After the applause subsided, President Xia sighed in admiration and concluded it's better to have no books than to believe in books. Today's event has given us a good example. Feng shui is broad and profound, just like this Heavenly Heart Water Gathers layout. Sometimes there are some subtle changes that can affect the overall situation. With this kind of skill, one can go further in the feng shui master's path. President Xia's evaluation of this young feng shui master was extremely high. Everyone couldn't help but look at him. At the same time, they also began to inquire about this feng shui master's background. Shortly after, the news spread that the young feng shui master was from the Meizhou metaphysics branch. His name was Zhang Wenfei. After hearing the news, I was bewildered. It was the Meizhou metaphysics branch again. The respected Mr. Zhao Dingwu was from the Meizhou metaphysics branch. Now, this young and knowledgeable feng shui master was also a member of the Meizhou metaphysics branch. I couldn't help but think of Meizhou. It was said that it was the largest gathering place for the Hakka people. It was said that after the Cliff Mountain, China would no longer exist. At the end of the Song dynasty, the culture of China was greatly damaged, and the country's fate declined. Not even 1 out of 10 Han people survived. Only a small number of Han people wandered to other places and became the Hakka people of the later generations. Other languages had their own regions, but only the Hakka language was spoken in the southern part of China. It was even spoken in Taiwan and Southeast Asia. Many people say that Hakka is the ancient language of the Han people, the true language of the Han people. Perhaps it was because of these historical reasons that the Hakka people had preserved their traditional culture more completely, and they were more agreeable to it. Chapter 89. After summarizing the second place, Chairman Xia sat down with a smile. After the feng shui masters in the audience discussed for a while, Chairman Wang stood up again and said with a smile, "Next, I will announce the #1 feng shui treasure land in this competition. As usual, we will first announce the number of people who chose this treasure land." While saying that, he tidied up the booklet in his hand and raised a thin stack. "There are only 2 people who chose this treasure land." After saying that, the audience burst into an uproar again, but this time I wasn't nervous. Although I recognized that the 2nd and 3rd place feng shui maps were auspicious points, I wasn't sure how good they were. However, the last picture that I confirmed was definitely an excellent feng shui spot, and it would definitely be ranked first. The only thing that surprised me was that there were only 2 people who got it right. It seemed that this group of contestants wasn't as strong as I thought. After the uproar subsided, Chairman Wang opened the booklet and looked at the audience, announcing the final answer. I focused and looked at it. As expected, it was the 7th picture that I confirmed at the last moment. After the answer was announced, the audience started to discuss again. A middle-aged feng shui master in the audience seat said in a loud voice, "This is clearly just a turtle tail point. Although it is an auspicious point, it can't compare to the previous 2 good points. How can it be ranked first?" As soon as he said that, someone in the contestant seats said in a mocking tone, "Turtle tail point? I don't think that's the case. This is clearly a snake's cave." After saying that, many people in the contestant seats nodded in agreement. However, most of the people in the audience seats were confused. Both sides had their own opinions, and no one could convince the other. I sat there and watched in amusement. This feng shui map of a ghost house was marked halfway up a mountain. There were several dragon and tiger passes in front of it. When it reached the foot of the mountain, it formed a terrain similar to a turtle tail. From the perspective of feng shui, this was indeed a turtle tail point. It wasn't too good, but it was also an auspicious point. At first glance, I also thought it was the turtle tail cave. However, I soon found something was wrong. There was indeed a turtle tail at the foot of the mountain, but the tortoise's tail didn't stop. It continued to spread up the mountain, faintly connecting with the mountain ridge. It formed a long and narrow vein that looked like a snake. This was the snake cave mentioned by the feng shui master on the contestants' seating area. In feng shui, this kind of hidden meridian was known as the hidden dragon. To ordinary feng shui masters, the hidden dragon was extremely difficult to distinguish. However, it was different for geomasters at the geomaster realm. Geomasters at the geomaster realm could use their Dao Qi to see through the layer of disguise on the surface and easily recognize the true appearance of the hidden dragon. However, this snake cave was no longer an auspicious cave, but an unmistakably ominous one. Although there was a saying in feng shui that snakes were small dragons, it was different in the feng shui of a ghost house. In the feng shui of a ghost house, dragon veins could be real or fake. Fake dragon veins were commonly known as snake veins or centipede veins. Therefore, this kind of snake-shaped meridian was naturally not a good feng shui. While the 2 sides were arguing, President Wang's expression turned cold. He coldly snorted at the person on the participants' seating area and said, "Relying on your geomaster cultivation to see through a hidden dragon, what kind of ability is that? What's more, this is a rare natural meridian, yet you thought it was a snake cave. Not only do you not know shame, but you also speak eloquently. With this kind of temperament, it will be difficult for you to achieve great things." As the head of a branch, President Wang's cultivation was extremely high. When he reprimanded that person, he had a different kind of imposing manner, causing that participant to lower his head in shame, not daring to argue back. At this time, the fat President Xia came out to smooth things over. He smiled and said, "Everyone, there is no need to argue too much. Since there are 2 participants who have chosen the #1 meridian, let them come out and explain the reasoning behind it. Everyone will naturally understand. Come, which two young heroes have chosen correctly? Why don't you come out and let everyone see it? Originally, I was calmly watching the others argue. I didn't expect that President Xia's words would push me out. Helplessly, I could only brace myself and stand up. After I stood up, all of the feng shui master's gazes focused on me, making me feel very uncomfortable. At this time, President Xia opened his mouth again. I remember that you are from the Shenzhen branch, as expected of our Guangdong's #1 metaphysics branch. Talented people keep coming out. After jokingly sighing, President Xia asked again, there is another young hero who has chosen correctly. Why doesn't he come out? As soon as he said that, the gazes that gathered on me finally shifted to look at the other participants. I was also quite curious as to who the other person was, so I also looked at the surrounding people. What I didn't expect was that the last person to stand up was actually Nangong, who was sitting beside me. This fellow had a frivolous smile on his face. He stood there in a sloppy manner. His temperament was completely different from everyone else's. He didn't seem like a feng shui master at all. On the contrary, he looked like a playboy who had nothing better to do. Seeing him stand up, the surrounding people also burst into an uproar. There was quite a bit of discussion about his appearance. President Xia, who was on the rostrum, didn't care. He also praised him. Then he smiled and asked the two of us, which one of you will explain to everyone the principle behind the #1 acupuncture point? Before I could say anything, Nangong directly sat back on his chair. Pointing at me with a smile, he said, Brother Zhou Yi's knowledge of feng shui is solid, and his eloquence is also outstanding. Let him explain. I just guessed it, so I won't join in. This fellow was purely acting like a scoundrel, leaving me speechless. I could only brace myself to stand there and answer everyone's doubts. Just like what the two big brothers said, this feng shui looks like a turtle's tail at first. After careful observation, you can see that it's a snake, hidden dragon. That was all I could see at first, but when I looked through it again, I found something strange. Speaking to this point, I paused and then continued. Everyone can pay attention to the mountain ranges on the left and right side of the picture. It's not the mountain range where the snake hidden dragon is located, but the mountain ranges in the background on both sides. After I said that, everyone lowered their heads to look at the picture in their hands. After a while, someone frowned and subconsciously asked, there seem to be a few mountain ranges in the distant mountains that extend to both sides. They look like turtle legs. When the snake hidden dragon reaches the top of the mountain, it also has a snake head. No, it's not a snake head, but a turtle head. Is this a turtle hidden, auspicious cave? As soon as his voice fell, someone came out to refute. How could it be? In feng shui of a grave, the most taboo is to choose a location that is too broad. A person's fortune is limited, and graves are also divided into different sizes. If you want to include such a distant mountain range, how big would this grave be? How could the person buried here bear it? This time, without waiting for me to explain, President Xia on the rostrum directly asked with a smile, what if you bury an emperor? Just as he finished speaking, the person's face suddenly changed. His mouth slowly opened, as if someone was strangling his neck. After a long time, he involuntarily said, You mean Emperor's tomb? Following his words, the hall buzzed with noise. Emperor's tomb. These two words, to a feng shui master, had a very special meaning. Emperor's tomb was the place where the Son of Heaven was buried. Normal feng shui masters couldn't touch the emperor's tomb's geomancy. It was rumored that only those who had reached the heavenly master realm could try. No matter which feng shui book it was, there was no record of the emperor's mausoleum. To ordinary feng shui masters, the emperor's mausoleum was more like a legend than a real thing. No one would have thought that they would see it here today. At the beginning, I didn't think about it. It was purely a coincidence at the last moment that I found the structure of the mountain range in the distance. Then, I inexplicably thought of the two words Emperor's Tomb. Combined with the feng shui map, I found some clues. The excited discussion in the meeting hall didn't stop for a long time. In the end, President Xie spoke up to calm the crowd down. However, everyone's face was still flushed. It was obvious that they hadn't recovered from their excitement. This is our Metaphysics Union's president, Li from Shenzhen. When he found out that the exchange meeting was going to be held in Shenzhen, he specially sent a feng shui map. At that time, he told us that if no one chose this map, then he wouldn't mention its origin. At that time, including the president, we all thought that no one would be able to find any clues from such a complicated map. We didn't think that not only did someone see through it, but it was also two people. The younger generation will surpass the older. After President Xie announced the end of the first day's activities, the crowd below the stage dispersed. No one paid any attention to Xie Tianyu. However, there were quite a few people who surrounded me, and Nangong. The other metaphysics societies were fine, but most of them were from the Shenzhen metaphysics societies. After all, the location of the conference was in Shenzhen, and there were many local feng shui masters. In addition, I was also a member of the Shenzhen branch. So many people used this excuse to chat with me. Most of them said something along the lines of, "I've long heard of your name, but I just didn't have the luck to get to know you. Now that I've met you today, I feel like we hit it off." I glanced at them, and there were even a few feng shui masters who came with Xie Tianyu to cause trouble for me a few days ago. These people were quite shameless, but I didn't really care about them. After laughing and joking around for a long time, I finally got rid of them. It wasn't easy for me to squeeze out of the crowd. I turned around and saw that Nangong sloppily following behind me. He didn't cause any trouble along the way, so he was just using me as a shield. I got angry and couldn't help but say to him, "You also chose all 3 diagrams correctly. Why are you hiding behind me? There are a lot of people who want to get to know you." Who knew that Nangong would say in a serious tone, "That's not the same." I already said that I was just guessing. Otherwise, do you think I would let you talk about something that was in the limelight? I snorted disdainfully at his words. Stop talking nonsense. If you can guess everything correctly, then wouldn't other people be so ashamed that they would hit the wall and commit suicide? You should have a limit to your modesty. Nangong still looked serious. He shook his head and slowly said, "I'm not being modest. At that time, when I was looking at the pile of diagrams, I didn't know what to choose. Coincidentally, I turned around and saw that you chose those 3 diagrams. So, I followed you and blindly guessed those 3 diagrams. You see, if it's not blind guessing, then what is it?" I opened my eyes wide. This guy copied me? Looking at his calm face, I couldn't imagine that someone could say that he plagiarized so confidently. How thick was his skin? Previously, I thought that my previous impression of him as a little rascal was a misunderstanding. But now, it seemed that it wasn't a misunderstanding. Not only was he a rascal, but he was also a scoundrel. Now, I suspected that his identity as a contestant was also fake. After all, I couldn't feel the fluctuation of Tao energy from his body. Although it was hard to imagine that the person who arranged the event would leave such a big loophole for him to sneak in, it was hard to say with this guy's temperament. After all, there was the saying, "It's dark under the light." Moreover, there were many schools of feng shui. It was hard to see the realm of many special cultivation methods, so he might have taken advantage of a loophole. Just as I was about to ask him for confirmation, Nangong spoke first. He yawned, seemingly a little sleepy. Shaking his head, he said, "All right, I'm just here to have some fun." I feel that this exchange meeting is rather boring. I won't be coming for the second round tomorrow. You can play by yourself." After saying that, this guy didn't care about my shock. He patted his butt and prepared to leave. But after turning around, he seemed to remember something. He turned his head and said to me, "Oh, right, I gave you my business card. You have to take it well this time. If anything happens, remember to call me. Okay, see you later." After saying that, he waved his hand at me and left, leaving me standing there in a daze. This guy, he just got the same first place as me, but he left just like that. He didn't even want to participate in the second round tomorrow, even if he really plagiarized my answers. Isn't this too cool? What's the point of plagiarizing me if he doesn't participate in the second round? Thinking about what he said to me, I searched my body for a long time and found the business card he gave me today. After looking at it for a long time, I didn't believe that this guy could help me if something really happened. I was going to throw the business card away, but after thinking about it carefully, I put it in my wallet. When I came out of the venue, I saw Yang Kaichen standing at the door, seemingly waiting for me. What made me feel strange was that there were two people standing next to Yang Kaichen, one old and one young, and I knew both of them. One was the old man Zhao Dingwu, who gave a speech on the podium this morning, and the other was Zhang Wenfei, who explained the water-gathering heaven's heart feng shui in the afternoon. Why are these two people from the Meizhou Metaphysics branch with Yang Kaichen? With surprise, I walked to Yang Kaichen's side. The old man and the young man stood there without saying anything. Yang Kaichen smiled and introduced them to me. "Zhou Yi, you should have met these two today. Let me introduce you again. This is Senior Zhao Dingwu, and this is Senior Zhao's last disciple, Junior Zhang Wenfei." I had a good impression of these two people from the Meizhou Metaphysics branch. After greeting them with a smile, I asked Yang Kaichen. I didn't expect Big Brother Yang to be old acquaintances with Senior Zhao and his disciple. Yang Kaichen nodded and looked back at old man Zhao. His eyes were filled with gratitude and respect. Then he turned back to me and said, "When I was young, my family suffered a disaster. My father died early, and my mother and I were also plagued with illnesses. Later, Senior Zhao accidentally passed by my house and saw that there was a problem with the feng shui of my house. After giving my mother some pointers, my family's situation gradually improved. After that, I also became interested in feng shui metaphysics. I slowly studied it myself and gradually entered this circle. In the past few years, Senior has also given me pointers on feng shui many times, but unfortunately my aptitude is poor, and I haven't had any achievements. It turned out that there was such a past between them." I smiled and said, "Since Senior Zhao has given you pointers, then you can also be regarded as his registered disciple." I just said it casually, but who knew that Yang Kaichen would quickly wave his hand and say anxiously, "I don't dare to say that. Senior's disciples are all geniuses of their generation. I don't dare to call myself a disciple and disgrace Senior's reputation for no reason." Old man Zhao's hair was white, and his back was hunched, but he was in good spirits. His voice was like a great bell. He reached out and slapped Yang Kaichen's head and scolded him in Hakka language, "Mangu." After scolding, he turned to me and said with a smile, "Young man, you are young, but your attainments in feng shui are not low. You are much better than this disciple of mine." Since an elder praised me, I naturally had to be modest. However, before I could open my mouth, old man Zhao waved his hand to stop me and said, "Today, this old man didn't come to find you for anything else. I just wanted to remind you that you might suffer some hardships in the near future. Remember to be careful when you handle things." Chapter 91. Feng Shui and Physiognomy were inseparable. Most feng shui masters had some knowledge of physiognomy. Although Grandpa Zhao hadn't reached the Earthmaster realm, he had high attainments in feng shui. His physiognomy was probably not ordinary either. When Nangong told me about it, I didn't care. But now that Grandpa Zhao mentioned it, I couldn't help but care. While I was frowning and thinking, Grandpa Zhao seemed to have something else to do. He waved his hand and left with Zhang Wenfei, without talking to me. Yang Kai-Chin excused himself and hurried to catch up with them. When they were gone, I turned the matter over in my mind as I walked home alone. Physiognomy masters didn't know much about themselves. They could see the problem from my physiognomy, but I couldn't. I could only make wild guesses. What I needed to do now was to return to the Fire God Temple after the conference. The other thing was the Meow Girl, Zhaoing. Someone could come to trouble me at any time. The Meow Girl was easy to deal with. It wouldn't be hard for me to get a good result in the conference. Moreover, after the trip to the Fire God Temple, the Feng Shui Association would take care of me. When the Meow people came, no matter who it was, they would have someone to rely on. From the looks of it, what kind of danger would I encounter when I returned to the Fire God Temple? The unknown was always full of variables. It wasn't good to guess blindly. After thinking for a while, I didn't think about it anymore. Just like what Grandpa Zhao had said, I would be more careful these days. As for the rest, I could only wait for things to develop. The next day, Yang Kai-Chin thought he had something to do, so he didn't come to find me. I got up alone and ate breakfast. Then I leisurely walked to the conference venue. Yesterday, there were a lot of people in the venue. Today, it was completely full. Besides the many feng shui masters who came to watch the competition, there were also many people from the society. All of them had an extraordinary aura. They seemed to be rich and noble. In their daily work, feng shui masters came into contact with these officials and nobles. They relied on them to eat. The Metaphysics Association invited these people, so it was a good thing. After sitting down on the contestants' seats, I turned to the right. Nangong's seat yesterday was empty. Even when the conference officially started, I didn't see his figure. Now, I believed that this fellow wasn't talking nonsense yesterday. He really didn't want to join the party. The people from the Metaphysics Association also noticed the situation and intentionally delayed the start of the competition. They waited for Nangong for a few minutes, but he didn't appear. They could only helplessly announce that Nangong was disqualified. After the dragon seizing tournament officially began, the examiners yesterday, President Wang and President Xie, were nowhere to be seen. Our Shenzhen branch's President Su took over the main stage. He will be the chief examiner today. Compared to President Wang and President Xie yesterday, President Su was much more old-fashioned, causing the atmosphere to be more depressing. After he announced the start of the competition, he gave out a small booklet similar to the one yesterday. Then, he showed us the feng shui map. What was different from yesterday was that today's booklet was a feng shui map of the Yang residence. The booklet was very thin, and there were only 3 pictures in total. President Su opened his mouth and announced that today's rules were that each picture would be worth 2 points. The contestants would have to use the feng shui of the Yang residence to guess the health and financial situation of the owner's family. If they answered all the questions correctly, they would get 2 points. If they answered incorrectly or missed something, they wouldn't get a single point. This rule was very advantageous to me. Since there were 3 maps, there would definitely be some difficult ones. Even if I couldn't answer the most difficult one, as long as I could answer the other 2 questions correctly, I would at most lose 2 points. In the first round of the competition yesterday, besides Nangong, everyone else had at least 3 points less than me. This meant that even if I answered 1 question incorrectly, I would still be able to obtain first place. Even if I answered 2 questions incorrectly, Unless someone answered all the questions correctly and obtained 3 points yesterday, first place would still be mine. With that thought, I didn't feel any pressure. I casually flipped open the booklet and started to read it carefully. I couldn't help but smile when I saw the first question. It was the same as the feng shui of the Yang residence, which was ranked third yesterday. This feng shui of the Yang residence was basically a 3-point question for the contestants. It only violated the most common feng shui of the Yang residence, so it would be difficult to answer incorrectly. I didn't think too much and picked up the pen to write. There is water flowing through the house. This is the water that cuts one's feet. It's very inauspicious. The owner of the house lives here and suffers from rheumatism in his early years. Within 5 years, he will definitely have a stroke. After I finished writing, I didn't think too much about it and continued to read. When I saw the second picture, I suddenly laughed. This feng shui map wasn't too simple. Relatively speaking, it could be considered quite difficult. But coincidentally, this map tested the placement of the Yang residence's kitchen door. What was even more coincidental was that the mistake of the kitchen door in the feng shui map was the Qian kitchen door and the Sun Gate's heavenly fengyang pattern. It was the same mistake that our county's feng shui master, Wang Zikan, had made. To me, this question was more like a 3-point question. I didn't hesitate to pick up the pen and write. The Qian kitchen door and the Sun Gate, the metal and wood punishment war. The woman is lewd and evil, the family is crazy, the man drowns himself in a well and hangs himself. The qi in the 2 sides of the body attacks the heart, the legs are sore and numb, the man coughs and becomes paralyzed. After I finished writing, I didn't look at it anymore and directly flipped to the third picture. When I saw the third picture, I frowned. It wasn't that the third picture was difficult, but it was too strange. In the picture, there was a house in an ancient village. There were 2 mountain peaks in front of the house. The one on the left was long and narrow, shaped like a corpse lying on the ground. The one on the right was short and had a few branches that formed the shape of fingers. It looked like the right mountain was a hand that was dragging the corpse-shaped mountain in front of it. In feng shui, this kind of Yang residence was called the corpse-dragging mountain. It was very rare. In addition, as long as there was a corpse-dragging mountain, there would be a long and narrow road between the palm-shaped mountain peaks. Moreover, this road would be white. This road was called the neck constriction road. I lowered my head and searched for a while. Soon, I found this road. Corpse Dragging Mountain, Neck Constriction Road. In theory, these were all ominous geomancy. It should be easy for me to figure out what was going on. However, when I looked at the door, I saw a triangular pond. Moreover, its sharp corner was facing the door. There was a sharp horn at the door. In feng shui, it was called the sharp horn evil spirit. The owner of this house was prone to eye diseases, and he was poor. His health and fortune weren't good. It wasn't the end of it. In the house, there was the Gen Gate, and the Qian Master was paired with the Sun Stove. This was the combination of wood, earth, and metal. It represented the longevity of a man and a woman. It was also an ominous sign. Seeing so many ominous signs, it was enough to tell me how bad the feng shui of this house was. However, with this kind of geomancy, people would die within 3 to 5 days. Even if they didn't know anything about feng shui, they shouldn't have built such a house. It was really strange. Did the Metaphysics Society build this house with strange feng shui just for this competition? It wasn't impossible. However, I carefully looked at the picture. It was an old house. Moreover, it was quite old. It couldn't have been built recently. After thinking for a long time, I looked at the information about the owner of the house. Then, I arranged the owner's horoscope. After thinking about it for a long time, I finally had an idea. I carefully wrote under the third picture, "Life is cheap, house is ominous, but it can be saved in a desperate situation." After I finished writing, I didn't think too much about it. When the time was up, I handed the booklet in. I wasn't sure about the last picture, but I was very sure about the first two pictures. The answers couldn't be wrong. This way, even if I couldn't get any points from the last picture, I could still get 4 points. Adding the 6 points I got yesterday, no one could surpass me. I calmly sat in the audience and waited for Chairman Sue to review the answers. His usually serious face revealed a trace of happiness. He waved the booklet in his hand and said with a smile, "I've looked through everyone's answers. Just like yesterday, let's announce the scores first." All the 30 feng shui masters who participated in today's competition got points. Among them, 22 people answered 2 questions correctly and got 4 points, including Zhou Yi of the Shenzhen branch. Therefore, the champion of this competition has been determined. Everyone can congratulate Zhou Yi in advance. The person who won the first place in the Dragon Season competition could be called the champion. After Chairman Sue finished speaking, the audience burst into applause. However, the applause wasn't very enthusiastic. After all, after yesterday's first feng shui competition and today's Nangong's withdrawal, there was basically no doubt that I would be the champion. Everyone knew it in their hearts. Chapter 92. Double Champion. The person with the highest total score in the Dragon Season contest could be called the champion, but it was not so simple to be the double champion. Not only did he have to win first place, but he also had to get full scores in both competitions. Only then could he be qualified to be called the double champion. I'm sure I'll be the champion, but the double champion is a surprise. The audience below the stage was also shocked. After a moment of silence, they burst into deafening applause. The people of his branch won the championship, and it was a rare double champion. Chairman Sue's face was no longer cold, but full of smiles. After the audience calmed down a little, he began to explain the 3 geomancy maps of Yang House in today's assessment. The first one, Cut Feet Water, and the second one, Heaven Fingo, were not too difficult. There were many geomancers who got it right, but Chairman Sue still explained it carefully and seriously. The ordinary geomancers under the stage and the guests who came to watch the competition were all fascinated. After the explanation of the 2 pictures, all the contestants cheered up and looked at Chairman Sue with shining eyes, waiting for his explanation of the third picture. This geomancy map is actually not difficult. I think everyone can see the pattern of dragging corpses, mountain, constricting neck road, recoil evil, and finally the pattern of wood, earth, and metal restraining each other. At this point, President Sue paused for a moment and explained the specific details to the guests before continuing. These are all omens of great misfortune, so it's not difficult to identify them. From the answers we've received, most people's final verdict is that evil spirits in a haunted house will definitely perish if they live in it. Only Zhou Yi's judgment is that evil spirits in a haunted house will be revived in a desperate situation. Since only Zhou Yi answered correctly in the end, I think everyone can also find something from this answer, right? Chairman Sue asked the audience with a smile after explaining the general situation. Evil spirits in a haunted house will be revived in a desperate situation? Many geomancers under the stage murmured to themselves almost at the same time, and then many people stretched out their hands and pinched their fingers to calculate the 8 characters of the house owner with the turning trigram palm. It didn't take long for someone to ask, doubtfully, "Life is 1 to 2 to 3, lonely for 100 years. It's really a cheap life. But how can a lowly life be saved in a haunted house?" After listening to him, I shook my head. He should be a feng shui master who knew how to read fortunes by bones. However, this kind of fortune-telling technique could only predict 1, 2, and 3 lives. It couldn't predict the life of one. 3 lives that were worth 3 lives. If the luck physiognomy was suitable for carving, it could help one's luck in a certain matter and achieve success. The Metaphysics Association's champion seal was actually a magic tool, or rather, a pseudo-magic tool based on the theory of seal physiognomy. This was because the seal had the power of a magic tool, but it was a consumable item and didn't have a spirit. Even so, the champion seal was no small matter. When it was used, its power was comparable to a heavenly master's attack. Moreover, because it was an attack-type magic tool, it was even more precious. In a crucial moment, it could save a life. Seeing me accept the champion's seal, everyone below the stage was envious. Even Chairman Su's expression was filled with envy as he repeatedly congratulated me. Before participating in this competition, Chairman Su had instructed me to represent the Shenzhen branch to fight for the title of champion. Although I didn't take it to heart at that time, the result was a happy ending for everyone. Because of this result, Chairman Su's attitude towards me was obviously much better. He immediately told me that even if the matter regarding the true dragon veins didn't succeed, he would make the decision to promote me to the position of the Shenzhen branch's vice chairman. Furthermore, he clearly told me that if I were to encounter any trouble in the future, I could look for him for help. Chairman Su knew the reason why I joined the Shenzhen Metaphysics Association. His words were a clear promise that if the people from the Miao village came looking for me, he would do his best to protect me. Hearing that, I was elated. After working so hard for so long, I was actually just asking for a protective talisman. Now that Chairman Su had finally promised me, and I even had the champion's seal, no matter what Nan Gong and that old man Zhao saw from me, with the current situation, it would be hard for me to encounter any trouble. Even when I returned to the Flame God Temple, I didn't encounter any life-threatening danger. This time, I had Vice Chairman Yang Shilong, whose power might have reached the Heavenly Master's realm, accompanying me. It was really hard to imagine what kind of life-threatening danger I would encounter. At this moment, the gloominess in my heart was completely swept away. After keeping the champion's seal, I walked down the platform amidst the cheers of the crowd. The dragon seizing competition had already ended, but the exchange meeting wasn't over yet. There were still a few more feng shui activities to be held in the next few days. However, to feng shui masters, the following activities weren't very interesting. Apart from the people who were asked by the Metaphysics Association to participate, there weren't many people who were willing to participate. Naturally, I didn't have the mood to participate in the following activities. Moreover, the reason why Vice Chairman Yang Shilong and the rest stayed in Shenzhen was to wait for me to participate in the dragon seizing competition. Now that the dragon seizing competition had just ended, they were urging me to depart with them. Before departing, I supplemented the route that I had drawn previously and drew out all the details. However, I didn't mention the abnormalities in the Yellow Springs River and the Ghost Valley. On one hand, the situation in those two places had changed when I returned from the Flame God Temple. On the other hand, those two places were extremely dangerous. Even a person of Chairman Su's realm wouldn't necessarily be able to walk out of them. If I explained it too clearly, I wouldn't be able to explain how I had entered and exited the previous time. After everything had been prepared, I set off with Vice Chairman Yang Shilong and the other two directors from the headquarters. We headed towards Shenangjia. In reality, even if the headquarters hadn't sent anyone, I would have returned to the Flame God Temple sooner or later. I was the only one who returned from the previous trip, while the fatty's life and death were unknown. I couldn't let it go. In these 2 days, I basically stayed in my own tent thinking about whether or not I should borrow Yang Shilong and the rest's power to summon the fire god temple again. Fatty had disappeared into the fire god temple. If he wanted to find Fatty, he had to find the fire god temple first. Back then, I saw the method director Lou used to summon the fire god temple. As long as I can find someone like the Fatty who has the experience and a sacrificial person, I should be able to summon the fire god temple again. It will definitely be difficult for me to do this alone, but using Yang Shilong and the power of the Metaphysics Union to summon the fire god temple is almost effortless. The only problem was that the last time I stood outside the fire god temple, I couldn't enter. Even if I summoned the fire god temple this time, would I be able to enter? If I couldn't enter, then I could only ask someone else to go in and find Fatty. However, the people from the Metaphysics Union probably wouldn't do their best to find him. After thinking about it for 2 days, I couldn't confirm if I should tell Yang Shilong and the rest, so I could only take it one step at a time. When I arrived at the fire god temple, I would observe the situation before deciding on my next step. Very quickly, 2 days passed. At noon on the 30th of September, we packed our luggage. The 4 of us stood by the river, waiting for the floating corpses to appear. At around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the first black dot appeared in the distant river. When the first corpse floated in front of us, countless black dots appeared in the distance, forming a black line. Since I had explained the situation before, Yang Shilong and the rest weren't too shocked. They only observed the corpse on the surface of the river and nodded. It really is a soulless corpse. After studying it for a while, we started swimming towards the river. Along the way, countless corpses floated past us. Even though it was the second time I encountered this situation, I still couldn't help but feel scared. Since we set out early this time, it was still daytime when we reached the upper reaches of the river. At this time, there wasn't a floating corpse bridge at the upper reaches of the river. However, every 10 seconds or so, a corpse would float up from the bottom of the river and slowly float downstream. We sat by the river and slowly waited. Gradually, the night sky enveloped us, and the sky became dark. The last time I came here, it was the 15th of the lunar calendar. After the sky turned dark, the moonlight shone brightly, and everything on the river could be seen clearly. However, this time, it was the first day of the lunar calendar. There was no trace of the moon in the sky, and we were in the depths of the forest. So when night fell, the sky was dark, and only the light from the flashlights in our hands could be seen. I held the flashlight and shone it towards the middle of the river. There were continuously dried corpses that floated up from the bottom of the river. Under the light of the flashlight, it was as if their entire bodies were emitting black light. It looked extremely scary. Strangely enough, those corpses were soaking in the water, but none of them had swollen up. Quite the contrary, they all looked dry and shriveled. They didn't look like corpses that had died in the water. Instead, they looked like dried corpses that had been blown away by the wind in the desert. We looked at the corpses on the surface of the river until midnight. All of a sudden, a bubbling sound came from the water. We hurried to use the flashlight to see. There were a lot of bubbles and white foam rising from the surface of the water. This situation lasted for around 2 minutes. Then, the bubbles and white foam disappeared, replaced by a sea of black corpses. Now, I knew that the corpses that made up the floating corpse bridge had appeared all at once. The situation in the water looked like a massive school of black fish that had suddenly jumped into a small pond. All of a sudden, they rose from the bottom of the water to the surface, crowding together. It looked strange and absurd. Just like Yang Shilong and the others, it was the first time we had seen such a strange scene. We stood by the river and held the flashlight in our hands. We kept silent and didn't know what to say. Around 1 or 2 minutes later, a layer of corpses appeared on the surface of the water, blocking the entire river and forming a floating corpse bridge. Although Yang Shilong was interested in the golden head underwater, the most urgent matter at hand was to cross the river. Shortly after, he reacted. He waved his hand and said to us, "We shouldn't delay any longer. Let's cross the river." After saying that, he took a step forward and directly jumped onto the floating corpses in the river. The three of us followed behind and were about to jump onto the floating corpses. Right at this moment, I heard footsteps next to me. Instinctively, I lifted my head and saw a shadow dashing past us. It jumped onto the bridge of floating corpses. Then, it didn't stop and directly ran to the other side of the river. I wasn't the only one who was startled. Yang Shilong and the others were also startled. They couldn't react in time and just let the shadow run past them. Before we could react, the shadow had reached the center of the river. The Yellow Spring River was a deserted place. After we had left the scenic area, we hadn't met anyone along the way. How could we coincidentally meet someone here? Before I could figure it out, Fang Xing, who was standing next to me, shouted, "Who are you? Why are you following us?" I was surprised. Did this person follow us here? After Fang Xing shouted, the shadow stopped at the center of the river. However, it immediately moved to the other side of the river. Fang Xing was enraged. He took out a magic tool that looked like a folding fan and raised his hand to draw the Tao energy. Yang Shilong, who was standing not far from him, raised his hand to stop him. This place was full of floating corpses, and I had told them about the black zombie incident. No matter what, we shouldn't use our Tao energy here. We couldn't be sure if something unexpected would happen. Fang Xing reluctantly stopped. We could only stare at the shadow crossing the river. It was strange that after the person reached the other side of the river, he didn't hurry to leave. Instead, he turned around and looked at us from a distance. Yang Shilong and the others had prepared excellent equipment for this trip. For example, their flashlights were military-grade LED flashlights. Even though they were dozens of meters away from the river, they could still see the person's face clearly. So, the moment the man turned around, I saw his face. Then, I was completely shocked. Chapter 95. The fatty's father didn't die. That's impossible. At that time, I was standing in front of Lin Aching and saw him stab the dagger into his own chest. How could he not be dead? But if he was dead, who was standing on the other side of the river? Also, why did the fatty tell me that he suspected that his father wasn't dead? At that time, I thought that the fatty was just imagining things, so I didn't take it to heart. Now, I was completely dumbfounded. Lin Aching stood on the other side of the river. Under the light of the flashlight, his face didn't show any expression. His eyes were just as dull as before. After looking at us for a while, he turned around and disappeared into the darkness. Who was that? Have you seen him before? After Lin Aching disappeared, Yang Shilong turned to ask me with a gloomy face. I kept silent for a while, then shook my head. It was too dark. I didn't see him clearly. The fatty's father's case was too strange. Instinctively, I didn't want to tell anyone. Yang Shilong frowned and seemed to want to ask something. Fang Xing, who was standing on the side, opened his mouth first. He said angrily, "These 2 days, I felt that something was wrong. I always felt that someone was spying on us, but I couldn't find any obvious signs. I didn't expect it to be that person. I don't know his purpose yet, but his strength isn't bad. At least, he's not weaker than me." I was surprised. Not weaker than Fang Xing? He's the director of the Metaphysics Union. His strength is at least on the same level as Chairman Su. He's at the peak of Geomasters. How could the fatty's father have this kind of strength? Although I hadn't started cultivating that year from the talismans that old he and the others used, I could roughly guess that they were at the Geomaster realm, which was similar to my current strength. At most, they were one realm higher than me. At that time, Oldie's strength wasn't just one realm higher than the Fatty's father's. Based on this, the Fatty's father's strength was at the same level as mine when I was in university. It had only been a few years, and the Fatty's father was getting old. Even if he was still alive, how could he have this kind of strength? Was I wrong? Or did this person just look like the Fatty's father? But how could there be such a coincidence? A person who looked exactly like the Fatty's father and happened to be a feng shui master, and I even met him. After thinking for a long time, my brain was still a mess. As for Yang Sherlong and the others, they began to discuss that person's strength and speculate about that person's objective. They were all worried about whether that person had also discovered the true dragon's vein. With this conjecture, Yang Sherlong and the others' expressions became even more gloomy, fearing that something might happen to the true dragon vein. They all sped up and rushed to the other side of the river. While eliminating the ghosts, I felt a little heartache. If I could send so many ghosts to Tong Tong's jade bracelet, her power would increase. Unfortunately, I didn't dare to bet on Yang Sherlong and the others. I couldn't let Tong Tong take the risk. I could only reluctantly give up on these ghosts. After 2 or 3 hours, the Tao energy in my body was almost used up. Finally, the number of ghosts in front of me became less and less. The previous army was gone, and only a few ghosts were left. They came to me one by one, seeking their deaths. I gritted my teeth. As I was about to eliminate the last of the ghosts, a vague ghost appeared in front of me. It swayed and walked toward me. At first, I didn't pay attention to it. Out of habit, I wanted to eliminate it. However, when the talisman in my hand was about to touch the ghost, I found that the ghost's face was somewhat familiar. When I took a closer look, I was startled. That ghost was none other than President Liu. After a person died, if they were lucky enough to form a ghost, they would have the same appearance as when they died. This Yin soul should be the Yin soul that was formed after Chief Liu's death. However, Chief Liu had disappeared from the Fire God Temple. How could a ghost come here? Moreover, if Chief Liu was dead, what about the Fatty and the others? Were they also dead? Chapter 96. At this moment, there weren't many ghosts left. I didn't need to look for them. I just needed to lift my head to see their appearances. However, except for Chief Liu, I couldn't find anyone else who had traveled with us. Did I get the wrong person? I turned around and saw that the ghost that looked exactly like Chief Liu was still in front of me. It didn't want to leave me alone. I studied him for a while to confirm that he was Chief Liu's ghost. Then, I used a talisman to destroy him. After I had destroyed Chief Liu's ghost, the others had also destroyed all the other ghosts. The 4 of us regrouped and continued on our way. Along the way, we encountered a few scattered ghosts. Yang Sherlong and the others didn't even need to take action. They killed them easily. While walking, they discussed the reason why there were so many ghosts here. I anxiously watched the ghosts that we encountered. However, I didn't see anyone else until we got out of the canyon. I heaved a sigh of relief when I didn't see the fat man's ghost. However, the appearance of Chief Liu's ghost meant that they were in danger. I was more worried about the fat man. After we got out of the canyon, the terrain of the embryonic breath dragon vein appeared. Yang Sherlong and the others gave up on guessing the reason why there were so many ghosts. Instead, they focused on observing the embryonic breath dragon vein. It was the same as the last time we came here. It was much safer along the way. Although it was harder to walk, we didn't encounter any other dangers. Moreover, the further we went, the more obvious the signs of the true dragon vein became. Yang Sherlong and the others became excited. When we got close to the fire god temple, the terrain of the ancestral dragon vein also appeared. Yang Shilong and the other two were excited. Fang Xing even said that he had sensed the aura of the true dragon vein. There must be a true dragon vein in front of us. Yang Shilong wasn't so sure. However, he smiled and urged us to move faster. Eventually, after following the ancestral dragon vein for another day, the forest in front of us suddenly widened. We saw a lush green grassland with a murmuring stream. We had finally arrived at the stream where the fire god temple had appeared that day. Without waiting for my reminder, Yang Shilong stopped walking and said, "The aura of the true dragon vein is here." Fang Xing and Lu Zheng had obviously noticed this as well. They nodded at the same time, but their expressions were a little solemn. Fang Xing asked, "Old Lu, do you feel anything strange?" Lu Zheng was a man of few words. However, at that moment, he said, "The aura of the true dragon vein is right before us. According to my senses, the aura of the true dragon vein is so thick that it feels like it is right before us. However, I cannot see it with my eyes." It was because of his words that I had broken through the final barrier and entered the Earthmaster realm. But now, the illusory Dao Qi that Deng Meng had said didn't exist had been drawn out by Yang Shilong using the copper coin sword. Not only that, but he had also made the 4 marks of Dao Qi visible to the naked eye. What kind of power was this? I subconsciously thought that this was the power of a heavenly master. However, Yang Shilong had told me that he was still only an Earth Master. The power of an Earth Master had already subverted my understanding of Dao Qi. What kind of power was a heavenly master? While I was still in shock, the 4 marks of Dao Qi suddenly spread out from Yang Shilong's body. As it spread, it became bigger and bigger. In the end, it seemed to encompass the entire world. At this time, I roughly understood the purpose of Yang Shilong's drawing. He must have used pure Dao Qi to detect if there were any fluctuations of power in the void in front of us. From there, he could determine if there was something hiding the true dragon vein that they had already sensed. I had to admit that Yang Shilong's idea was completely correct. At that time, after the fatty had divined the secrets of heaven, and Zhao Yongquan had sacrificed his life, the fire god temple had slowly appeared in this void. This also proved that the fire god temple was in the void in front of us. However, the strange thing was that Yang Shilong's drawing seemed to have enveloped the entire world. However, he still didn't discover any abnormalities in the void. Apart from a slight pause in the middle, it continued to float far away without any obstruction and finally disappeared in the void. Yang Shilong withdrew the copper coin sword in his hand and frowned. He said hesitantly, "This void seems to be a little strange, but the Jing Qi couldn't be detected. Could it be that it was really a mysterious formation set up by some almighty person?" The 3 of them discussed for a long time, but in the end, they didn't get a definite answer. At this time, it was already late. Yang Shilong told us to set up camp and wait until tomorrow to decide. At night, it was still Fang Xing and Lu Zheng who were on night duty. Although I was lying in the tent, I couldn't fall asleep. I kept making decisions in my heart. Should I tell them the secret of the fire god temple? Just as I was hesitating, someone suddenly knocked on the outside of my tent in the middle of the night. I thought it was Fang Xing or Lu Zheng who was on night duty looking for me, so I opened the zipper of the single-person tent. In the end, the person who appeared in front of me was the mysterious person from a few days ago. Before I could say anything, he pointed at the forest not far away from me. Then he quietly retreated and disappeared into the darkness. I understood what he meant. He wanted me to go to the small forest to talk. Although I was suspicious of this person's identity and knew that I might encounter danger if I rashly approached him, I couldn't help but be curious. I hesitated for a while before leaving the tent. Using the excuse of going to the toilet, I quietly followed him into the forest. Just as I walked in, I saw the person standing not far away from me, with his back facing me. I hesitated for a while, then asked, "Uncle Lin, is that you?" After staying silent for a while, the person answered with a muffled voice, "It's me." His voice was low and stiff, exactly the same as the fatty's dad in my memory. I was pretty sure that the person in front of me was the fatty's dad. I asked anxiously, "Uncle Lin, I remember that you already," without waiting for me to finish, the fatty's dad suddenly turned his head, extended his hand and interrupted me, then said to me, "Let's not talk about my matter for now. I came to you today to tell you that I already know about Puzi's matter. You don't need to get involved in this matter. I will bring him back. Also, someone asked me to bring you something. I want to hand it to you personally." I was stunned for a while before I reacted. He really did know about the fatty's matter. But how did he know about the fire god temple? And how did he have the confidence to bring the fatty back? Although I was suspicious, I didn't ask further. Since he was the fatty's dad, he was far more concerned about the fatty's safety than me. Since he said that, then he must have some confidence. What made me even more suspicious was the last part of his sentence. Someone asked him to bring me something? Who would have to go through his hands to give me something? Before I could figure out what was going on, the fatty's father had already thrown a black thing to me. Then he turned around and left without hesitation. I didn't care about the fatty's dad for now, and lowered my head to look at the thing in my hand. Under the dim light of the night, I took a closer look at what I thought was a black mass. It wasn't black at all. It was a red, cloth-like object. When I opened it, I realized that it was a red handkerchief with 2 lines of small words embroidered on it. The night was dark, so I couldn't see the words clearly, but looking at the red handkerchief, the figure with the same color appeared in my head. Chapter 97. It had been a few years since we parted that year, and I hadn't heard from Red Shadow at all. Even my memories of her were blurry. Only when I saw you, Juan, would I remember her from back then, as well as her words, "Take care, husband." I thought that everything that happened back then would just be a dream, but I didn't expect Red Shadow to suddenly send me news. I held the red handkerchief in my hand. I was so excited that I was shivering. I stood there and took a few deep breaths to calm myself down. Then I carefully turned on the flashlight and shone it on the handkerchief. There was a line of beautiful words embroidered on it, and it shone in my eyes under the light of the flashlight. The black dragon and Qilin not parting gracefully. The bright star suddenly reappears, and when we meet again, we will hold hands. The words on the handkerchief were out of my expectations, and it was hard to understand. I couldn't tell what it meant at the moment. Since I had been out for quite some time, I was worried that Feng Xing and the rest, who were on night duty, would notice something amiss and come looking for me. I didn't have time to study the words and quickly put the handkerchief away and returned to my tent. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I held the handkerchief in my hand and continuously pondered over the meaning of the 4 sentences. I couldn't understand the first 2 sentences, and the third seemed to be related to the bright star. What made me the most excited was the 4th sentence, because there were 2 words in it. Meet again. I could vaguely understand the meaning of the last 2 sentences. It seemed that Red Shadow had agreed on a day when the bright star would suddenly reappear, and then we would meet again. Red Shadow had said that we would meet again if we were fated. Could this, the bright star suddenly reappear, be the fate that she had mentioned? But what did the bright star suddenly reappear mean? Bright star, bright star. Could it be that when I reached the glory of knowledge realm, I would be able to meet her again? Thinking about it that way, I felt that it was highly possible. Back then, Red Shadow had given me the death scripture and allowed me to walk the path of a feng shui master. Now that she had used the realm of feng shui to make a promise with me, it seemed easy to understand. The glory of knowledge realm is the last stage of a geomaster. Back then, Zhao Yongquan had just entered the glory of knowledge realm. After that, the Shenzhen Metaphysics Association's president Su, as well as Yang Shilong and the others who came with me this time, were all theoretically at this stage. Among these people, Zhao Yongquan's strength was the weakest, while Yang Shilong should be the strongest. Moreover, from my observations, the difference in strength between the two of them was quite large. It seemed that there was still a long way to go between the beginner level and the great mastery level. However, this had nothing to do with the Red Shadow's promise. If the Red Shadow really meant this, then as long as I could enter the glory of knowledge stage, I should have met the requirements. I didn't sleep the entire night. The next morning, I was still wide awake and excited. After they woke up, Yang Shilong and the other two had already gathered together to discuss something. Looking at their attitudes, they would not rest until they found the hidden true dragon vein. However, just as I had expected, the three of them worked hard for an entire day. But in the end, they still couldn't find anything. They could only helplessly look at the empty space in front of them. That night, Yang Shilong called me over again and asked me to tell him the details of the last time I saw the true dragon vein. Originally, I had only come here to find the fatty. If he had asked me yesterday, I might have hesitated on whether or not I should tell him about the fire god temple. However, the previous night, the fatty's father had already told me not to care about this matter, so I naturally wouldn't say anything more. I only told them that the last time I came here, there was a mountain range, and the true dragon vein was on top of it. However, the true dragon vein had disappeared a day later. Seeing that he couldn't get any useful information from me, Yang Shilong could only helplessly ask me to return while they continued to think of a solution. In the next few days, Yang Shilong looked as though he was going to stay here and didn't have any intention of leaving. He sat by the stream every day and stared at the empty space in front of him. Sometimes he wouldn't even eat and would just sit there for an entire day. Yang Shilong and the others still didn't move even after we ran out of supplies. I couldn't sit still anymore and proactively went to ask the three of them. After persuading them for a long time, Yang Shilong finally agreed to stay here for another day. If we still couldn't find any valuable clues, we would retreat first. I finally heaved a sigh of relief and went to pack my luggage, preparing to leave. However, in the early morning of the second day, while I was sleeping, there was a sudden earth-shaking explosion that woke me up from my dream. I hurried out of the tent to take a look, and I was dumbstruck. Not far from our tents, there was a huge flame burning in the air. It lit up the originally dark night sky, as if it was daytime. Not far from the flame stood a person. I took a closer look and saw that it was the fatty's father, Lin Aching. That day, he had hurriedly left after saying a few words to me. In the next few days, I didn't receive any news from him. I thought that he had already left. I didn't expect that he would suddenly appear again today. Moreover, he had appeared in front of all of us in such a high-profile manner. At this moment, Yang Shilong and the other two also walked over. They lifted their heads to look at Lin Aching. However, Lin Aching didn't look at us. His eyes were focused on the burning flame in the air. Looking at him, Yang Shilong and the other two didn't take action. They also stayed there, waiting to see what he would do next. Not long after, a black dot suddenly appeared in the middle of the burning fireball. Then, the black dot gradually expanded. In the end, it became a hole made of flames. Under the illumination of the surrounding flames, it looked very deep. The hole was really big, and it was facing me. However, no matter how hard I rubbed my eyes, I couldn't see what was inside. At this moment, the fatty's father turned to look at us. Then, he didn't hesitate to lift his leg and jump. He wanted to enter the deep hole. Yang Shilong, who hadn't said a word, suddenly shouted, "There's the aura of the true dragon's vein inside the hole. Let's follow him." Then, he didn't care about the others and dashed toward the hole. He was an old man, but his speed was surprisingly fast. Fang Xing and Lu Zheng hesitated for a moment, but they immediately followed him. The three of them were very fast. In the blink of an eye, they were close to the hole. At this moment, the fatty's father wasn't in a hurry. After he jumped into the hole, he didn't walk in directly. Instead, he turned around and stood there calmly. His cold eyes gazed at Yang Shilong and the other two who were rapidly approaching. Finally, Yang Shilong was the first to reach the bottom of the hole. He didn't stop and lifted his leg to jump into the hole. At this moment, Lin Aching finally made a move. A black object suddenly appeared in his hand. It looked like a rock. Just like that, Lin Aching raised a stone-like object and threw it at Yang Shilong in a comical manner. Yang Shilong seemed to be prepared. I didn't see him move, but the copper coin sword that I saw a few days ago appeared in his hand. Then he threw it with both hands, and the copper coin sword flew into the air. Then it slashed down at Lin Aching's head. When the copper coin sword slashed down, the stone in Lin Aching's hand also flew into the air and hit the copper coin sword, creating a loud explosion. Following that, the momentum of the stone continued to fly towards Yang Shilong, and the copper coin sword that could change its size was smashed down from the air. When it landed on the ground, the copper coins on the sword seemed to have been smashed into pieces. Seeing that Yang Shilong was about to be hit by Lin Aching's black stone, Fang Xing and Lu Zheng, who had arrived from behind, quickly took out their personal magic tools and barely managed to block the attack. Even so, the three of them still suffered heavy injuries and staggered back a few steps. Seeing this scene, I was shocked. A few days ago, when Fang Xing said that the fatty's father's strength wasn't inferior to his, I was very surprised. But now, it seemed that Lin Aching had defeated Yang Shilong and the other two in one move.